Okay, so I have just completely wardrobe slayed our next lovely lady who's here to talk. I can't deal. I can't even look at her because she's actually outdone me. It's time to talk about which is tricky to do, which is time to talk about the debate covering the topic around quotas and the best way to achieve greater diversity in the advertising industry. The panel is being moderated by the fabulous Deborah Clay. She's the news director at the Australian Radio Network. Deborah is a highly experienced and dynamic broadcast journalist who I will be having a selfie with later. As the National 9 News Director for the Australia Radio Network, Deborah oversees news for the KISS and Pure Gold networks. She presents the Drive News for KISS 106.5 and WSFM 101.7. Deb's unwavering contribution to the journalism sector in Australia was recognised in 2018 when she received the BNT's Women in Media Award for Journalism, and previously the Brian White Memorial Award at the Australian Commercial Radio Awards. Please welcome Deb Clay.
Thank you for your words, and I'm open to a second debate about whether it's golden, black or red today.
Totally red.
Now, today promises to be a lively and robust discussion, and we'd like you to be involved as we settle once and for all whether quotas are an effective way to achieving diversity and inclusion. We'd like you to be an active participant in today's debate. We're going to have a poll, and who knows, perhaps some of the talented debaters here today may challenge some of your thought propositions or maybe even change your opinion on this very important issue. We're going to be having a second poll after the debate today. The question is, do you think quotas are the best way to achieve diversity in the advertising industry? It's very easy to take part. The website, you just get it on your phones. We're encouraging you to do so. www.sli.do, the event code, #CTR1, and the results of the poll will be shown on the screen today. And then I'll be giving you a code again at the end of the debate for the final poll. So I'd like to bring the teams onto the stage. Tarla Lambert, the publisher and part owner at Women's Agenda, specialising in content strategy and production. Also, Georgiou, also on the 4 Quotas team. He's the strategic recruitment manager at Southern Cross Austereo. Spent about 15 years working in talent acquisition for global organisations. Also, Kauppinen. She's the head of marketing, demand generation and digital, IBM ANZ. 25 years experience as a marketing and communications leader, passionate about ongoing marketing transformation as well as mentoring. We also have the Against Quotas team. Annese, the CEO of Diversity Council Australia, as well as leading debate in this area on diversity and inclusion. She delivers innovative diversity practice resources for Australian businesses. And last year, she was named on Australian Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence list. And Melder, creative partner at Coffee Cocoa Gunpowder. He's an energetic creative director and is passionate about creativity in whatever form it takes. Working in every form, TV ads, innovative digital, social campaigns, direct comms, retail, as well as promotion. Welcome to the stage, Jen. And Sarah Wyse, head of media, AFL. A digital media executive with over 15 years' experience in the media, marketing and communications industry. Having spent the last 8 in the tech startup space, she has a passion for creating and building profitable business ventures that may transform the industry, bring value to others, or both. Now, we do have a few rules of engagement here today. Each debater will be given 5 minutes to speak, starting with opening arguments from our team captains. Our second and third debaters will then have the opportunity to also speak and to rebut the other team's arguments. In the spirit of fairness, each person will be given 5 minutes to speak, And at the conclusion of the debate, the team leader will be given a further 5 minutes to summarise their team's arguments. So let's take a look at the results of the poll. There you have it. Yes for quotas, 69%. And no against quotas, 35%, isn't it? So it will be interesting to see at the conclusion of this debate the influence of the various teams. So first, I'd like to bring up our first team captain and speaker today, Tarla.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to sell you the benefit of quotas, a topic that's become, I'll concede, a bit contentious. Some people think it's a bit dirty, like talking about money or politics or that mysterious rash you found last week. But it's time to get over it, because just like money, politics, and your questionable rash, quotas are absolutely something we need to talk about. It's something we need to talk about, get our heads around, and embrace, especially in media and advertising. Because here's the crux of it. Diversity isn't just a gimmick. It's not just about ethics, although of course that's part of it, but there's a very real business case that goes with it. We know unequivocally that businesses do better when equal representation exists. Study after study shows us that where women flourish in decision-making roles, in leadership capacities, organisations see better outcomes. And you know the most efficient, foolproof path to diversity, ladies and gentlemen? Quotas. The media hasn't caught on to this reality yet. In fact, new research out a few weeks ago paints a very dire picture. From 15 of the biggest news sites in the country, including The Australian, The Guardian, ABC, Yahoo 7, 9 News, BuzzFeed, The Age, and the Sydney Morning Herald, women are still missing where it matters. In opinion pieces and columns, and especially those in politics and business, the situation is particularly bleak. But what do we lose when women aren't there? Well, for starters, women consume news in a different way to men a lot of the time. We care about different issues to men a lot of the time. This is by virtue of the fact that things affect us differently. For instance, let's look at healthcare. Only last year did we see GST on tampons and sanitary products removed. Why? Because so few women were in media to report on it and lobby for change. Or let's look at cost of living pressures, something that's likely to impact women considerably more when we're still facing a 15% gender pay gap and depleted superannuation. Even something as broad as climate change will have a markedly different impact on women to men. It will impact women's health differently, our homes differently. It will impact our decision to start and raise a family. It will impact our capacity to grow and harvest produce around the world. How can we expect that the news we consume daily is laying out the facts in a way that is meaningful to us when women's voices are still missing from the chorus? We desperately need diversity of thought. The same is true for the advertising industry. Right now, women make up just 1/4 of creatives in agencies. What does that lead to? Men getting 4 times as much screen time as women and reference 7 times more than women in advertising. This is a statistic that hasn't changed in more than a decade. The term sausage fest in advertising is a whole different ballgame. No number of loose targets or supposed cultural overhauls are going to change this reality. The only thing that will is quotas. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a damn shame we're in this situation where we even need to be talking about it. If we hadn't been constrained by sexist stereotypes for hundreds of years, perhaps we'd be in a place where talking about gender equality in the workplace wasn't needed. But unfortunately, the truth is we are in that place. Without quotas, we're never going to see that gap close. The old adage that women can't be what they can't see will continue to hold relevance and weight. Right now in media, as a direct consequence of gender inequality, women are regularly plateauing at a certain level in their careers. They're rarely rising to senior roles, and when they do, they face a new level of judgment and scrutiny from the public and their peers. They're assessed on their appearance rather than their content. If we maintain the status quo, we'll continue to miss out on hearing women speak their truth and will discourage future generations of women from entering the fray. So quotas are needed, and they're needed desperately. It's not enough to initiate soft solutions. We know they don't work. Just take a look. If you need proof, just take a look at the present government. No quotas equals no women. The opposing team will try to convince you that there's some kind of legitimate argument around meritocracy. People should only be hired or promoted based on their unique worth. But let's be clear, meritocracy cannot exist where men are the only ones deciding who is meritorious, who sits at that table. Do we really think that if meritocracy worked as wonderfully as they'd have you believe, that we'd have to squint to see the women in a gaggle of old...
Look, thank you for having me here at the debate, and thank you, Tarla. But I think we need to remember that diversity is not just about women. It's about any identity that you might have. It's about your culture, your age, whether you're LGBTIQ+, whether you're Indigenous, or indeed any other identity you might have, Jedi Knight, Slytherin or Gryffindor, newly discovered relative of House Targaryen. Don't be ashamed of committing genocide, that's fine. And I'm also not going to argue about the business case. I run the Diversity Council. I know the business case. We need more women. We need more people of diverse merit at the top. This argument is about method. My team will convince you it's not the way. Aunt Melder, whose genius has created such notable campaigns as Game of Balls, which had me worried that I was going to be up in front of the Sex Discrimination Commissioner until I realised it was a campaign about testicular cancer. And Sarah Wyse, or as I like to call her, Sarah the Wyse from Middle Earth, will tell you how you actually need nuanced, systemic cultural change to create real change. And also, unfortunately, we are not going to go down the merit myth either, because I agree with the affirmative. Merit is defined by the eye of the beholder. It's defined by the dominant group. There's plenty of women of merit to be there at the top. So again, this is about method. Let me define quotas for you. Quotas are mandated instruments usually imposed on by regulatory authorities or governments, and they carry punitive measures. You must have X% of women on your board or you can be deregistered off the stock exchange. That's a negative big stick approach. And I don't think that the resources used to do that are very helpful. Targets and goals are very helpful, and they don't require the mandated quota. So we have to be clear about what we're arguing. But quotas, even if they were imposed, they don't actually deliver genuine diversity. And let me focus on merit. In DCA's recent Cracking the Glass Cultural Ceiling, we note that affirmative action programs for women benefit women who are Anglo-Celtic, straight, cisgendered, and able-bodied and non-Indigenous. In the same research, we noted that programs that focus on cultural diversity benefit men. So what do the affirmative then suggest? Should we have a quota for people of culturally diverse backgrounds, people of LGBTIQ+ identity, people from people who have disabilities? Let's give it a go. How many people in this room measure culture in their organisation? How many measure LGBTI inclusion? Disability. How can you set a target or a quota if you don't even have the basics right? Creating the type of organisational cultural change that enables genuine diversity and inclusion is a long and complex process that requires a whole range of interventions. It needs leadership, policy reform, examining and improving things like recruitment and talent management. I mean, the advertising and marketing industry has a long way to go. Don Draper and his ilk have not yet left the building, but you don't create diversity and equity overnight by imposing a quota. You need to get the basics right on your true journey to diversity and inclusion. I mean, good on you if you were part of that amazing Gillette ad that made the right-wing media lose their minds on toxic masculinity, if anyone remembers that. And in addition, if anyone here is responsible for the Ultratune commercials that were played during the Australian Open tennis, I'd like to see you after the debate. I have a note for you to take home to your parents and quite possibly a detention. So let's start taking action to create genuine diversity and inclusion, but not with a quota, with targets, with decisive interventions that focus on culture change, because a quota will mean that only one type of woman gets promoted, and she probably doesn't look a whole lot like the Australian community. I hope that in this conversation I've been able to convince you of the merit of not pursuing a quota-based agenda, but on cultural reform, which is broader and which includes all diversity. And I'd like to leave you, if you've had a light bulb moment, with a thought, in the wise words of a wonderful, great feminist, Kylie Jenner. She said that I feel like this year is really about just realising stuff, and like everyone around me, we're all realising things. I hope today you realise that quotas are not the best way to get diversity.
Good afternoon. My name's Arthur, and looking around at the panel, it's probably fair to say I'm the least qualified to be talking about quotas and diversity. I'm a 30-something white male, and come to think of it, probably on the wrong side of this debate. But it's people like me that are fearful of losing out with quotas. Whilst my speech will focus predominantly on gender, I think it's fair to acknowledge what Lisa was referencing, but I think it's important that we focus on gender because it's such an important issue and such an imbalance within the industry itself. A quick Google search will highlight the benefits that many countries, political parties and corporates have successfully implemented when they've implemented quotas. My newfound Finnish friend Muddy will talk to this shortly. Here's what people say when you make a case for gender quotas. It should be about getting the best person for the job. Aren't you worried about people being promoted just because of who they are, not because they're the best person for the job? The answer to that is absolutely. It is extremely unfair, and I'm categorically against people being parachuted into positions of power and influence just because of their gender or the colour of their skin. And that's precisely why we need diversity hires, and that's precisely why we need quotas. Historically, plenty of people are promoted just because of their gender or their race. Almost all of these people are white men. The truth is that equality is scary. The truth is that promoting more women where the number of positions is finite ultimately means promoting fewer men. I think it's important to acknowledge that up front. When culture or society reserves only a few places for women in a world of men, women are forced to compete against each other for that smaller space. Quotas will open up more room and let women flourish, and it will mean that men will have to work harder and better, and that's certainly not a bad thing. It is an unfortunate situation that we need quotas in 2019, we need diversity and inclusion strategies, and we need conferences like this. Currently, just 11 ASX 200 companies have female CEOs. That's 5.5%. Comparatively, men named Andrew lead 7% of companies. Unfortunately, there are no Arthurs for the moment, and not surprisingly, no Marthas either. Quite simply, populations are 50-50. Women and men graduate from unis or enter the workforce at the same pace. Given women are the ones that generally need to leave the workforce to have children, it's only fair that companies overcompensate and accommodate to correct the imbalance that occurs. Many explanations have been put forward as to why women aren't achieving equality, but the reason that makes logical sense is that nobody wants to talk about. It's simple prejudice or bias. Affinity bias, like for like. Innately, we warm up to people who are like us. It's a safety mechanism, but very dangerous when coming to recruitment decisions. Sometimes overt, sometimes backhanded, women of childbearing age are seen as a maternity risk, having to leave the workforce to have children and damage their careers, as where for us blokes, it's not a concern. Perception. We see men as the boss and women as support staff, EAs, admin, receptionists. Performance bias, prevalent in hiring and promotions. We tend to overestimate men's performance and underestimate women's. We hire men on potential, and women need a proven track record to be successful. Quite simply, some men are uncomfortable with women, and instances of inappropriate behaviour at social gatherings, things like the Me Too movement, have gone a long way in addressing this issue. And as an industry, media does a little bit better than corporate Australia with its gender balance. However, as Tarla alluded to, the Sausage Fest, the boys' club, is quite a loose industry sometimes and requires women to fit in. Long lunches, jobs being offered in pubs, golf days, etc. have long been the norm. We need more inclusivity across the board. McKinsey published some research in the Women in the Workplace 2018 report, and it speaks of the phenomenon of the only, the feeling of being the only female amongst a group of men, and this is extremely prevalent of women in senior or technical positions. When a woman is the only one in the room amongst a group of men, she'll be on the receiving end of more microaggressions, feel more challenged, or feel the need to prove herself, and generally feel less confident. And as an only amongst a team of 7 talented female HR professionals, I know the feeling all too well. SCA, my organisation, is not without its challenges, and we're doing some great things to improve our gender diversity. We recently hired a female general manager when we only had 14% of candidates apply to our job ad. Through proactive sourcing and positively discriminating women into the process, we had a balanced shortlist of 6 candidates, 3 male and 3 female. And guess what? The preferred candidate we hired was a female and hired on her merit. In an ideal world, quotas would not be necessary. In an ideal world, true meritocracy, the most talented people would be put forward, and that would automatically mean diversity. But quotas may be the only way of achieving, eventually, a world where quotas are obsolete. Thank you.
Hello. So Arthur and Tarla have thrown around some really relevant and interesting facts and stats there, which I don't actually want to dispute, but I want to pull it back from the stats to a more personal point of view. And with this personal point of view, I just want to give you some context on my take on this whole debate. So I'm going to start with an anecdote. I'm going to cast my mind back to the Cannes Lions Festival last year. I'm just going to set the scene. I was over there with my my old agency, Host Havas. We were winning some things and drinking a lot of rosé and having a lot of fun. I was at a swanky production company pool party. So there I am with rosé in hand, and a fellow from an ad agency, a creative director from another ad agency, came up to me, and I didn't know the guy, but he was a very friendly guy. We had a fun chat about advertising, Cannes awards, and so on for a good 5 to 10 minutes. Then at the end of this chat, the guy said to me, anyway, great to see you, Ash. Congratulations on the Project Revoice stuff. See you soon. I'm not Ash, I'm Ant. I straight away realised there'd been a case of mistaken identity, or as I named it, mistaken brown identity. Ash Naidu is a good friend of mine. He's a South African Indian fella, a really talented ECD from another agency. This guy had kind of got us mixed up. I kind of shuffled away awkwardly, and I thought it was kind of funny. It was a funny sort of thing to happen. Put it down to, you know, experience. I'm brown, Ash is brown, Ant, Ash. These things can happen. But then it happened again to me. Someone else did the same thing the next day, and again the next day. And it started to make me think, God, is there really only room for one brown ECD in the consciousness of Australian advertising? And that's kind of a sad thing, and things need to change. Then I look back on my career and I thought many times I've been mistaken for the IT guy, for the catering guy. Arthur mentioned being the only. Many times I've been the only in a room in an industry that's supposed to be talking to a really diverse nation. We're kind of just very one-dimensional. And I mention all of that as context because no one wants change more than me. It's really personal to me. But I don't want quotas. Organisations being mandated to hire me on the basis of my skin colour is to me just as insulting as organisations not hiring me because of that. Put me on a role on the basis of anything other than I was the right person for the job, and immediately I will feel undermined and insecure and under pressure and all of those things, singled out. But if not quotas, then what? I want change, but I want to work towards it together. And I really love words like Lisa's been talking about, targets, opportunities, and I like the word agitation as well, but more on that in a second. Opportunities, I think, at both ends of the industry, both junior and senior. Right now, kids at the very start of their careers in school or at college often don't even think or know about advertising as a potential career. The Pakistani kid in Lakemba, the Lebanese kid who goes straight into his dad's mechanic business, they could be brilliant in this industry. They just don't even know about it. Let's reach out to them and provide opportunities for them to get into it and stop fishing in such a tiny pool. And then at the other end of the spectrum, the senior level, there are plenty of diverse and really talented potential leaders, be they female, black, brown, yellow, gay, Muslim, maybe all of those things, who could easily step up with the right training and the right support and the right opportunities. So I want to make the case for change, because I think when we make the case for change, when we set out that moral case, that cultural case and that business case, it really does make changing the ratio a no-brainer. And let's agitate for change as well, which is why I think events like today are really important. Now, just to spin back to that scene in Cannes last year, one of the guys who actually mistook me for Ash then subsequently reached out to me on email and said, look, I'm really sorry, I see you wrote a piece about it, I saw what happened. That opened up a debate, a dialogue. He kind of apologised. We kind of talked about how things could be better. And that to me is in a microcosm the way things should be. Dialogue, moving together forwards to come up with new ways of doing things together, bottom up rather than top down. I prefer that dialogue far more than like laws and rules being brought in. The issue's so important, let's do it the right way, through our smarts, through our persuasion and our collaboration, rather than forcing our way through. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was fascinating. I feel sorry that you were mistaken for somebody else. I'm here to tell you, though, that quotas are the only way to go, and they're open for all minorities, as women are in our industry today. I grew up in Finland, where quotas are a natural part of the society, and gender balance is the norm. In 1965, when I was born, as the fourth youngest girl in an all-girl family, my mother, a medical doctor, stayed at home for 6 weeks and went back to work because that's what she wanted to do and that's what she could do. I could say I got women's equal rights in my mother's milk. For those interested, she also stayed working as a doctor until she was 75 and served in many medical industry boards. She was one hell of a woman. But the gender equality started a lot earlier in Finland. In 1864, women became competent and obtained legal rights. In 1919, married women gained rights to work without their husband's permission. In 1906, women could vote, and 1907, they could stand as candidates, and in fact, 19 members were selected on that very year. Today in Finland, 40% of parliament are women, and there are no more need for quotas, as it is driven by a natural gender balance. The list goes on. 1917, a number of women were given 4 weeks maternity leave. And today in Finland, the government funds the maternity leave and paternity leave. The decisions that were made hundreds of years ago and decades ago have paved the way to today's Finland, that is one of the top 3 leading countries in the world when it comes to gender equality. Apart from the tradition of social justice, legislation and ratios have been part of that natural transformation over Finland's history. In Finland, as I was growing up, with boys as equal, we went to school together, hand in hand, naturally co-ed. We went to university together, we graduated together and competed together for the jobs in the marketplace. The doors were open to boys and girls alike, and frankly, we didn't give it a second thought. I was a lucky one in a lucky country. Interesting to note that Finland has an area where it's still lagging. Women are still not represented equally in boards. So, what happens in Finland? Action is taken. A bill has been passed recently to set quotas for state-owned companies, 40% men, 40% women. Since I moved to Australia, many people have asked me, so what is the secret? I'm here to tell you, there is no secret. It's all about taking action and making gender equality the way we live, the way we love, the way we work. Equal number of baby boys and baby girls are born, and no mother or father will look at their child and say, hey, you've got these bits, you're going to be really lucky in this world. Go, son. Or, oh, my little baby girl, you've got those bits, it's going to be a tough ride for you. And somehow, along the way, we forget. And when we go to work, we think it's somehow okay. Our industry needs strong direction, governance, and quotas to ensure gender equality and parity becomes a reality now, and we don't wait another 200 years. It's naive to think that the discussion alone will take us there. Quotas work, it's simple, it improves the society for both men and women. It's a win-win. As I was driving my daughter to school this morning, she was horrid and shocked to hear that we're still debating this and not taking action. So I repledged my commitment to the cause because I want all the doors to be open to my daughter and for all women and all men in this society. And the quotas are the only way to get there. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Wyse, and I can tell you I wasn't always so wise. Because I used to also think that we should have quotas. I was a really, really big believer in it. And for those of you who know me in the room, I also have a business called Wyse Women, which I launched 3 years ago, specifically to change gender diversity at leadership level for women in our industry specifically. So I kind of went into that gung-ho around, right, we have to have quotas to make real change. And then I started to learn really quickly. And by the way, we're all saying the same thing. We all want an equal and diverse workforce. There's no doubt about it. But there's theory and then there's practice. And I think how you get there is actually a lot more challenging than maybe some of us might think in the room. Having spent 3 years working really closely with HR departments, CEOs, managing directors, and now running all of content for AFL Media. I don't know anything about the AFL, just so you know. But working at the AFL and down in Melbourne, and working really closely with their teams to see how they've been trying to make active change. And they still have a really long way to go, but I actually think they're probably one of the more progressive sporting codes in the country. If you look at how they've made that change, it hasn't been by saying, okay, here's the quota, here's the number that you need to hit. The reason for that is because of unconscious bias. Most people don't see the problem. That's kind of the problem. Not everyone actually sees the problem. So when you're asking somebody to make hires or make changes in their teams and in their divisions from a leadership point of view, without really understanding the systemic issues surrounding that challenge, you have all the wrong outcomes and all the wrong actions. You have people ticking boxes for the sake of ticking boxes. You end up having people who join the department or join the company who might tick a diversity box, but they still have the same mindset and still have the same experience as everybody else in the company. Therefore, you don't have any diversity whatsoever. A good example of this is if you look at some businesses, especially in advertising and marketing, having spent a long time in the media industry, there's a lot of women who join the team who are very masculine because they feel they need to be like the guys in senior roles. That's not bringing any diversity in just because you've ticked the box of hiring a woman, because actually they're exactly like the guys, so there's no diversity whatsoever. So it's kind of interesting, having spent 6 months at the AFL and working really closely with the GM of HR and people, to see what they've done to make the change. So AFL, for those of you who don't know much about the operation of AFL, sport, biggest sport in the country, really, really blokey. I'm one of the few females in a senior role in the company. I was actually hired through the AFL through Wyse Women, which is my business. So this is an interesting, I think, point to note, because this wasn't a case of just trying to tick a female box. It was they were trying to strategically partner with businesses to find ways of bringing in diversity of experience and diversity of gender. I mean, I'm a Brit originally. I've got no interest in the AFL, being really honest, and I'm not a sporting fan at all. But I do know a few things about media, so that's the important stuff. But the diversity of experience, I don't think, is something that we talk enough about either. It's not just around the diversity piece. I know that the diversity of gender specifically is something that we're very focused on, but I actually think it's a lot more than that. 70% of companies' diversity strategies fail, just so you guys know, because of quotas. So specifically because they're trying to reach numbers and they're trying to tick boxes around the numbers, the diversity strategies don't actually go anywhere. So best efforts, and it's great to drive short-term change, but it doesn't drive long-term change because there's no cultural education or no behavioural shift in how people are thinking about making change in the business specifically. I think also if you lead with quotas, you're forever in the meritocracy debate. And that's a really interesting point that I know Lisa's got a really amazing view on around how that's really a whole myth. But you get stuck in, like Ant put it, you're just being hired because you are of a certain background or you're ticking a certain box. But actually people then start feeling like they're not actually being valued because of their own experiences or what they actually deliver to a business. So it's really about the systemic issue that we have to start looking at. Interestingly, and slightly off-piece, but I just thought I'd mention it because, Scandinavia was mentioned earlier. Iceland has the highest representation of females in the workforce, which is awesome. It also has the highest rate of domestic violence in the world. So I think that's a really, really interesting shift when you look at what the systemic issues might be and the cultural change of a particular place. Again, it's that whole, okay, we want to, on paper, be able to make change and be able to bring people in different diversity. But actually, while you have lots of women in the workplace, there is still other issues, really big issues facing women on a day-to-day basis, which you could argue would take higher priority than their workplace position. I won't ramble on any more than that. Apart from clearly, you can all change your mind. I have. So make sure you get on that little app thingo and do it.
Thank you very much to all of the speakers today for their generosity of time and ideas. Finally today we're going to call up the team captains to summarise their team's arguments and also to rebut the other teams, starting with Tarla.
Well, first of all, I want to apologise for having to waste everyone's time today. I mean, you know as well as I do that there's only one reasonable approach here. But look, I do applaud the opposing side for a valiant effort. They really didn't have a lot to work with from the outset, and they gave it a red-hot crack. When we know that the answer is so glaringly obvious, it's hard to be arguing otherwise. But just for shits and giggles, let me reiterate. If we want to see real, tangible change in our lifetime, it's time to implement quotas in media and advertising. It's time to give worthy, meritorious women and every minority group the recognition they deserve and send a clear message that the boys' club of yesteryear is done and dusted. It's time to build a fairer future for us, for our kids, and for generations to come. And no, it's not glamorous. It's not where we wished we'd be, but we dug ourselves a bloody big hole, and now we need to dig ourselves out of it. The opposition has tried to thread a line that there are other ways forward, that we don't need to be thinking this way, that if you squint real hard, you'll see progress. But when they try to imply that quotas are in some way harmful to women, I have to call bullshit. The system has been stacked against women for decades, in overt ways like certain policies and covert ways like unconscious bias and stereotypes. The only way to break this system down is through transformation, and central to that is quotas. Murray's point about Finland perfectly exemplifies this. Let me stress this again. Nothing to this point in Australia has worked when it comes to achieving gender equality. No number of targets, no amount of open dialogue, nothing. Women and indeed every marginalised group in this country are still very much on the back foot. The opposing team might be willing to sit on their hands for another 50, 100, 150 years, but my team isn't. And I dare say the majority of you in this room feel the same as us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the gorgeous platitudes. I love a platitude, but it doesn't really do much. I've been working in this space for a very, very long time. Look, there has been a massive focus on gender. It really is not the only diversity dimension. There's this assumption in Australia that all women are the same, and they're not. There's an assumption that we are all packaged in one way, and I will refer back to that original research. Every piece of work will tell you affirmative action quotas benefit one type of woman. She's Anglo-Celtic, she's straight, she's cisgendered, she's able-bodied. Even after the same-sex marriage postal plebiscite was successful, only 30% of people are still fully out in the workplace. Look up our Out at Work research to see that. I knew also that they'd bring up the Northern European argument because it's viewed as a utopia for gender. But it's problematic to try and impose that regime in Australia for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the structure, the reforms that created change in countries like Finland happened in a context of a very different parliamentary system than the one that we have here. They also had quite a monocultural society at the time when these things were done. Australia doesn't look like that. We are a very multicultural country. The imposition of quotas might have helped get women onto boards, but it's insignificant if you're working on a factory floor. If the real issues for you are about the pay gap, or if the real issues for you are about violence, women on boards, it won't make any difference. There are also plenty of examples of companies who have deregistered themselves off stock exchanges in Northern Europe and registered them on more friendly stock exchanges for sexism. Because they want to get around the quota. And it really is a complex thing to try and impose. The other thing that's interesting about Northern Europe is that they have something that we don't in Australia, and it's not a quota. I've recently done quite a lot of economic modelling around the gender pay gap and why is it that it's really stubborn in Australia. And what they have is government-mandated parental leave. Men in Finland and Sweden and Norway and Iceland actually do no more housework or childcare than men in Australia. What they have is universal childcare that's paid for by the state. Quotas for women in Australia will do nothing to close the gap for the real burden and drudgery that happens for women, which is housework and caring. These are fundamental barriers to equality and reasons why women can't continue to climb their way to the top because they're restricted with all these other invisible things. So sure, impose a quota. And I know the argument about more Andrews than there are all women on the ASX. But if you impose quotas for women, they would be Andreas. There would be no Fatimas. There would be no Manishas. There would be no transgender women. There would be no women who were single parents. There will be a certain type of woman who gets equality. And then people will think the problem is fixed. And then we'll have to start the whole process all over again with other different identities. So that's a really important thing to reconcile with. The other issue that I think is really, really important is to understand that the merit myth is a myth, and this really is about method. We need to understand our local context and the things that really, really matter. I wish it was as simple as saying we'll mandate a quota, but try and do that in Australia and see how far you get. The government would have to pass legislation. How many people here are working in companies that are registered on stock exchanges? That's okay, so about half? Okay, so only half of you would be able to be covered by a quota. Companies that are not on stock exchanges aren't covered by these types of things unless you've got a regulatory authority. Think of the energy that would be used and the bureaucracy that could otherwise be spent on doing other things that create genuine inclusion. So I think we all agree that we want to get there, and it is about method, and I'm a pragmatist and I've been doing this stuff for a very long time. We need to do other things unless we're happy just to have Andrea instead of all the other type of women and other groups at senior levels in Australia. Thank you.
We do all want to get there, and I'm curious now as to the influence of today's debaters. Earlier we had a poll and around 65% of you were for quotas, around 35% of you were against. So if you may, I would encourage you to please get out your phones once again. The website is www.sli.do and the code is #CTR1. So there you have it. Around 3/4 of you are saying that you are against quotas, and the other quarter are saying yes. So well done to your influence today when it comes to speaking to and resonating with our audience members here today. And finally, I would just like to give a big round of applause to our fantastic debaters today. As you can see, we have a diverse and esteemed group of professionals here today. And thank you for your generosity of time and thought and ideas here today. You're all equally committed to equality and diversity in the workplace. And it will be interesting to see the impact and the influence of this debate here today on the advertising industry over the years to come. Thank you.